And I've never quoted so much from a book in my life before. Hi everyone!
Hello!
Jenna here.
I'm Grace.
And it's been a while.
Today we're going to talk about books that actually change our life. So, what do we mean by books that actually change our life?
We read a lot of books, but books that actually change our lives, we can remember it still quite vividly, even after some times have passed.
So the first book that I would recommend would be The Vegetarian. It's by Kang, this Korean author. It's quite a gory book, to be honest. The meaning of what the book was trying to, I guess, convey is that, you know, in a dog-eat-dog world, how to not harm others is to be a tree. And they narrate it through this very gory plot.
Okay.
Basically, of this lady who wants to be a vegetarian one fine day. Yes.
Just looking at the title won't make me think that it's going to be a gory book. Or a book that changed your life.
Or a self-help book.
Yeah, like The Vegetarian.
Kang has other books that other people raved about, like Human Eggs, etc. But and I've read quite a number of her books, but I felt that the book that really stood out the most to me was still The Vegetarian.
Okay. That was a fiction book. So for me, I have a non-fiction book. So I'm going to introduce you to The Becoming.
The Becoming?
No, Becoming. By Michelle Obama. I actually have a few friends who ask me like, hey, do you have any books to recommend? And if they say that they're going for a non-fiction, generally I would recommend Becoming. I think that it's a very apt book no matter what life stage you're in. So actually this book is a memoir by Michelle Obama, and it basically documents her life, you know, ever since she was a kid. And she was like a nobody in that sense. Yeah, you know, she didn't grow up in an elitist family and things like that. She grew up as just a normal
in a black neighborhood, right?
Yeah, African American in America. Basically follows her through, and then she becomes the first lady. First lady, correct, of the United States. She speaks about her experience in a very witty and light-hearted manner.
Right.
And it basically like gives us a better glimpse into a life that we will never be able to experience. And the way she ended was so impactful. It centers around the idea of like becoming is not a destination, it's a process. Yeah, and I remember very clearly I was on a plane when I read that last line, and I just cried and cried and cried, and then my mom was like, we're on a holiday, you know, and I was like, oh. I highly recommend Becoming by Michelle Obama. Yes.
I want to recommend The Master and Margarita. I'm not gonna even attempt to say the author's name because it's in Russian. Firstly, The Master and Margarita is not an easy read. Yeah, it's written in Russian, so it's translated basically. The reason why it's not an easy read is partly because of the names. Firstly, all the character names are in Russian, right? And each character has more than 3 names.
Each character has more than 3 names.
Yeah, so half the time, and there are many characters. So half the time, like, I was just trying to decipher which character they're talking about in this scene. It's a book that has a very ridiculous plot. Yeah, like cats will hold guns lah. It's quasi-religious as well. It's a fiction book though. There are very different narratives all weaved into one central plot. Yeah, it's that type of book. And half the time it doesn't make sense. Like the details doesn't really make sense.
Okay.
It's like magical realism, a bit surrealist. Ultimately, a lot of people say that it's a political tale because it was written in 1930s when Stalin was in power.
Okay.
But it was not only until like I think it was the 1960s where this book was first published because of censorship during Stalin's time.
30 over years later.
The way the writer writes is in such a light-hearted tone that you can either laugh or you cry at the ridiculousness of how the plot is. So the idea is to go in with like an open mind and not delve too deeply or try to understand too much about what the plot is actually trying to say, but really just enjoy the process.
It is what it is.
Exactly.
Okay.
One of the part that made me decide that I really like this book is that how actually non-humans meaning in the sense of the supernaturals like witches, etc., that they are actually more humane than humans.
Oh man.
Yeah, so like there are certain scenes in the book that depict or rather give me this type of feeling. So I like the entire experience of reading this book and actually thinking back about it. So that's why I would recommend it.
Okay, so if let's say I say I want to read a fiction book, you would recommend this?
I've also asked like how if you're down for a long read, because it's not a short book actually.
Okay.
If you're a very adventurous reader, this is the book I would recommend.
I feel like there should be like a data dictionary where you just document all the names, right?
Yes,
So that you can
Excel
flip it and be
file.
like, oh yeah, this is the character that also appeared in chapter 1 and chapter 27.
I think half the time I'm like, it's so hard to even write the name.
Right.
It's so long.
Since you talk about fiction, I'm going to talk about a non-fiction again.
Okay.
Yeah. So this book is called The Book of Joy,
Ooh.
Lasting Happiness in a Changing World. So basically, they touch on very central themes like compassion, about love for others, and it's a non-fiction book that actually really speaks to me on many fronts. It also aims to answer some of the burning questions that we have. For example, like how do we continue to love when the world is in total chaos right now? Like how do we find it in ourselves to care for others when we ourselves are struggling? Yeah, and actually this is not a self-help book. Yeah, it's really a book that stems from their personal experience and like what works for them. Yeah, and it also doesn't give very ridiculous like solutions, such as that you have to get up and meditate for like 5 hours before you start the day in order to, practice mindfulness. So it's something that you read it and you're like, oh, actually I can do that. It puts religion aside. Both of them come from very different religion.
Yeah.
Yeah, but somehow the things that they preach about is still very fundamentally human. It's not what it means to be a Tibetan Buddhist or what it means to be a Christian. Sometimes when I'm just talking about like maybe social issues or stuff like that, then these kind of things like pop into mind.
Right.
Yeah, like quotes from this book specifically. Really, if you are looking to understand more about joy, about compassion for others, about what it means to be fundamentally human, then I'll recommend this book. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's also very interesting that the book is called The Book of Joy and not The Book of Happiness.
Yeah.
Right, because I would think that happiness is like an emotion that come and go, but joy is more like a state of being.
Correct.
And that they really explain how to kind of be in that state more than anything.
And they're like old and cute.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like Desmond Tutu actually flew over to meet Dalai Lama on his 80th birthday.
Yeah.
And they spent the birthday together like talking about this kind of things.
On to my final book. It's called Born a Cry by Trevor. And it is probably the lightest book, most light-hearted book among all the books that I recommend today. It's light-hearted because of the way Trevor writes it. But the topics that he talks about are actually not light-hearted at all. Yeah, so you've read the book as well, right? Yeah, it's really about his memoir growing up in South Africa, and about how he got into stand-up comedy and things like that. So basically it's him narrating his entire life to the point where he is at the point he was writing the book, basically. I feel like the way he writes is like the way he talks.
It's very witty, right?
It is very witty, and you can imagine him saying this type of things on stage as well. He used comedy and his own way of comedy to put things into perspective.
Correct. The humor is like when he's touching on a pretty serious topic, but then he injects some humor into it. And then you're like, huh? And then you're like, oh shucks, I shouldn't be laughing. But it's funny. But it's like, oh no, I'm laughing at racism.
Yeah.
So, but I guess that's what makes his writing very unique. Actually, before I read this book, I've actually not heard of Trevor Noah.
Oh.
Yeah,
so how did you chance upon this book?
I have no idea. I think I was just scrolling through Goodreads or something, and then I read like the synopsis, and I was like, oh, this guy is a stand-up comedian, and he's actually famous. Yeah, so I went
hosting the Daily Show.
Yeah, I was like, what is this? So I went on to YouTube. I was like, oh, So I actually, unlike many people, I believe I started off not knowing who he was first.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would recommend this to anyone who kind of just who's down on life.
Yeah.
Yeah, because his humor will somehow just get to you.
Yeah. And maybe it's like you want to know a bit more about the apartheid, but you don't want to like go into like full blown what happened. Then this could be like a good introduction to what's life like
Exactly.
Yeah. So the last book that I have is actually a fiction book.
Ooh.
And this one is highly controversial. Actually, I realized that I'm the only one who liked it. I have friends who really don't like it, and I have friends who couldn't complete it. Case in point. Yeah, and I have friends who was like, what is this book even about? Okay, so if you haven't already guessed, this book is called A Little Life.
What do you like about it?
I don't know, I just feel like I can still remember the characters very vividly, even though I read this book like years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just remember feeling so much emotions that it has to be a book that changed my life. So I felt anger and I cried so many times.
Right.
And this was actually one of the only books where I couldn't continue reading because I was so overwhelmed. I get why people say that you shouldn't be anyhow recommending this book to people lah.
You gotta be in the right mind space.
Correct. There's a lot of trigger warnings in there, which I wasn't alerted to. Self-harm, depression, disability, abandonment issues, sexual abuse.
Wow.
It's really any... Normally when people ask me, do you have any fiction books to recommend? I would recommend this, but I would also probably caveat it.
So be like, this is good, but
this is good to me.
Right.
Yeah, like personally, I felt that it was good because it really brought me on the whole roller coaster ride of emotions now. It follows 4 boys. These are the main protagonists.
Yes.
Yeah, and you really develop them to the best of their potential, I find. Yeah.
Apparently, I just didn't even get to 1/4 of the potential.
Yeah! And how many times have you tried?
I think about 4 times.
Exactly! I understand why people would not like this book, even after they finished it.
Sounds like an experience,
It is. It's not a little at all.
Yeah. The books that we've recommended in this video is more of we recommend it because of experience that we went through while reading the book and the type of feelings, emotions, perspectives that the books have given us. Yeah, and that's why we would recommend them to people around us.
Yes.
So yes, tell us if you have any other books that you recommend reading. So I guess that's all from us.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.